So I got into edible insects because I was living in the frontier and I was looking for agricultural investment opportunities in developing nations. And I went really all in when I realized how much health benefit there is in eating insects. And so I wanted to kind of use myself as a test dummy and try it out. And it was kind of around the same time that I decided, okay, I'm going to join a cult, I'm going to become a vegan, and I'm going to test that out as well. So the combination of the two things, I decided, well, I'm going to become vegan, but I also really want to see if this insect thing works. And so I'm going to have to figure out my own little framework to combine them. And so I called it Entovegan and started posting sort of my journey. But what has really inspired me, what I've really learned over the past year and a half, 2 years, is the opportunity for development in the developing world, in frontier countries, the opportunity for people in rural areas to benefit economically and nutritionally through edible insects. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but first, what I've learned through joining the cult and becoming vegan and really learning with an open mind is that things are a little bit different than I had thought. I had a lot of preconceived notions because there's extremists in every sort of organization, and you always hear about sort of the extreme faction of people on the vegan side. But really, just to look at it as a plant-based diet, so vegans and vegetarians who are getting their protein not from animals but from plant sources. And the nutritional benefits that are there. It's been really interesting, though, to see how many people have contacted me and said, hey, I'm also a vegan or I'm also a vegetarian, but I've been eating insects as well. I didn't know there was a term for it, Entovegan or Entotarian. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing, but I think it's really cool, it's sustainable, it's healthy, like, I'm also embracing it. And I've kind of learned that there's different levels of people who eat a plant-based diet. It's not all just for fighting against animal cruelty, but there's also the health impact for them individually. There's the sustainability in farming and whatnot, and buying local, and then of course the animal cruelty as well. And that's the biggest hurdle with convincing vegans and vegetarians to embrace entomophagy and eating insects. But in the process of doing that, if you have a company or a brand that's looking at this as a potential demographic, there's a few things that I've learned. So one of the biggest things is that it's always insect protein, 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 protein. And for people who are vegans or vegetarians, that's not a really big selling point, because you can get all the protein that you need from plants, honestly. I didn't believe that, but now I've learned that you really can. The other day I went to Earth Fair up the street, and I had a bar that was 12 grams of protein, and it was made with sprouted watermelon seeds. I didn't even know that was a thing, let alone that I could get protein from it. So the idea that insect protein is a selling point for them, it really isn't. But a lot of the other things that have been talked about this morning, in terms of gut health and vitamin B12 and minerals and all the other aspects that you know about with insects, those are key selling points, because especially like the vitamin B12, it fills in a gap in the vegan diet that can't be filled with plants, and it can only be filled really with artificial supplements. So that is an actual selling point with using insects. But in terms of selling the benefits of insects to this demographic, honesty is really, really important. Because as you learn to scan labels very quickly, you learn to sniff out any sort of BS in terms of hype around nutritional, this is going to make you superhuman sort of thing. And so one of the things that I learned that's just really stuck out in my mind in the early days when I was learning about insects is I remember seeing infographics and reading that crickets have as much protein as beef, or more protein than beef. And that's really not true. Cricket powder has more protein than beef. And it's a very, very important distinction. And you'll still find articles from Huffington Post or Men's Health, like big publications, that just say crickets have more protein than beef. And it's a nice clickbait title, but it's not something that's actually true. And so, as Ali was talking about controlling the narrative, that is something that's really important to call those things out and make sure that whatever information is being put out, especially for this group, there hasn't been a lot of negative feedback yet, but I think over time there will be some more people trying to poke holes in entomophagy, especially probably from the more hardcore vegan side. And so just making sure that whatever's put out there in messaging is really true. Hand in hand with that is making products that are actually nutritious and not just gimmicky products. I've gone on record like a year ago, I made a video defending some of the bigger companies that I saw getting criticized for being just marketing companies. And I've seen in other industries, it's actually really important that some of these companies that are very well funded put the information out there. Yeah, it's sort of gimmicky products. You get a couple grams of protein, but it's they're desensitizing people in the West to eating bugs. That it's okay to eat bugs. It's fun to eat bugs. It's healthy to eat bugs. that's actually, they're doing a service to the rest of the industry. But now, the last year to 18 months, as you've all probably seen, 100, 200 new little small brands that are kind of trying to make their way into the industry. It's important to make real products, and that's going to be the point of distinction as opposed to just making sort of gimmicky ones. The biggest question, though, that I get doesn't have to do with nutrition. When I talk to vegans, the biggest question is, well, how are they being farmed? Like, are we just building more like huge industrial factories to farm insects? Because, you know, then that's not actually sustainable. That's not actually something that I really want to support. And I kind of thought, you know, my misconception about vegans was that it was do no harm, right? You don't want to harm any living thing. And living in Buddhist country, it's kind of also the ethos. But really, the distinction is do the least harm possible. And so it's on an individual level, doing as little harm as possible, and also that means to do as much good for everyone else as possible. And so when people are looking at the net of the big picture, like sustainability, is it doing good for people in rural areas? Like, are they farming? Are we exchanging cattle land in rural areas around the world for growing crickets in their natural temperature, open air? The farmers are growing vegetables and feeding to the crickets. There's not really any collateral damage as far as like, you can make the argument that then when crickets are farmed that way, it's a lot healthier or a lot more sustainable than, say, growing soy, because there's the collateral damage of killing small mammals and birds and reptiles and all of the other things. So you can make that argument, but only if that's actually how they're being farmed, or if the bigger factories are using solar and they're carbon neutral, because it doesn't really make sense if you think about it from a sustainability aspect to build huge factories to farm crickets in Western countries where there's snow on the ground half of the year, and then process and package those foods and send them to Western countries. Like the UN's report was all about people in rural areas have the economic opportunity and have the ability to combat malnutrition through entomophagy. And yet, a lot of the questions that have come up to me that I haven't really been able to defend too much are, well, how are they being farmed? And are they being farmed in Western countries and big factories? And it goes to the idea of really human-friendly production. The one thing that has really stood out to me in the last year in working in frontier countries is just the positive impact that it can have. And so, as you are making your products or building your farms or whatever your involvement in the industry, something to really think about is, how is this benefiting people other than people in Western countries? Are we doing this really for the betterment of the planet? Or are we doing this so that hipsters in San Francisco and other big countries can buy really exotic, expensive protein snacks, or have adventurous culinary dining experiences at white tablecloth restaurants? What really is the purpose of pushing edible insects on the Western culture? Because people all around the world are already eating edible insects, and they stand to benefit the most from the growth of this industry if we make that focus. I'm going to leave you with one story. This elderly gentleman from Thailand, he was 80 years old and he was just basically waiting to die. His kids and his grandkids had all left and gone into other cities. He was living off of a little bit of government money, but he didn't have anything to do, and he was just there in this village. And Dr. Yupa, who many of you probably know who she is in Thailand, she knew many of the other people in the village who were already farming crickets. And so she went to him and said, hey, listen, I can help you, give you something to do. You can raise crickets, I'll help you build a pen, you can sell them, you have a little bit of income, you have something to do to keep you occupied, keep you motivated to stay alive, give you some nutrition. And so he was like, all right. So fast forward 8 years, and we showed up on this day to meet this guy. And he was sitting there just with the biggest smile on his face, and he had all his egg cartons out in the sun, they were drying, and his pen was clean, as you can see. And Dr. Yupa was like, well, why are you so happy? And he pulled out his little roll and he started counting. He was like, I just sold all of my crickets this morning. I made $450. And if you know kind of the average monthly salary in Thailand, that's more than the average monthly salary. And of course, he's making it in 5 or 6 weeks, but still, the idea that someone 88 years old can have that sort of just joy because now he has something to do, and the impact that it's having. And the other people in the village as well, the houses that they're able to build. And what happens in rural areas is when people who are really, really in poverty, when they start to rise up out of that, they have the little bit of extra money that comes in. For most places, especially in Southeast Asia, it goes to education for their kids and their grandkids. And so that education then tends to, over the next generation, the next couple of generations, it builds up society into something that's much more flourishing and is able to really advance. So I just want to encourage everyone here that's part of the entomophagy industry and whatever you're doing. Two kind of things. The vegan and vegetarian demographic is huge, but this is directly tied into it. And there are a lot of people who will embrace entomophagy of meat insects, but they want to know that it really, truly, like the messaging really is honest, the products really are nutritious, and that the eco-friendly side of things, the sustainability in farming, and the human impact really is making a difference in the developing world and not just giving lip service to it. So, thank you.